Alright guys, welcome back. As you know, we're going to read the play Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. And so today I want to give you an introduction into that play and to the man, Julius Caesar. First, let's start with just a brief review. I think you covered some of Shakespeare's life last year, and we did it a little bit earlier. William Shakespeare is an English playwright and poet. He lived from 1564 to 1616. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is an English town not far from London. And London is the city in which he achieved his professional success. I always like to make sure people know the countries that make up the United Kingdom, also called Great Britain. And that would of course be England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Not Ireland. Ireland is its own sovereign nation. Ireland and Northern Ireland have been separate countries since 1921. Northern Ireland is part of the UK. Okay? So if we look at Stratford, and that's on the Avon River, that's where the upon Avon comes from. Stratford-upon-Avon is pretty close to London, and London, of course, is where the Globe Theatre was located. Shakespeare, we believe, wrote 37 plays, and those plays have been placed into three categories by scholars: comedies, tragedies, and histories. Some of his later comedies are sometimes included in another category called romances, but that hasn't really caught on. So those three categories that I mentioned a moment ago, comedies, tragedies, histories, those are generally accepted and used to discuss his plays. Julius Caesar is a tragedy and fits into that category. In tragedy, the central character or hero must overcome internal or external problems, conflict. And that's like most fiction, right? In almost all fiction that we read, the central character has to overcome conflict. But something that we speak specifically in tragedy is that the central character in tragedy has a fatal flaw. And that fatal flaw is a trait that leads to his or her own demise. Okay? And so let me give you a few examples from some of Shakespeare's tragedies. In Macbeth, it was ambition. For Othello, it was jealousy. For Hamlet, he of the to be or not to be, that is the question. It was, of course, indecisiveness. He couldn't make up his mind. And then for our pal Romeo, we know that it was rash behavior with no thought of consequence. In Julius Caesar, we're going to discuss the flaws in several different characters: Julius Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, Mark Antony. Okay. Now, let's talk about the real man, Julius Caesar. Shakespeare's play is based on the real life of Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar was a Roman general, politician, and author. And he wrote a lot. And in fact, even though he lived a very long time ago, we know quite a bit about his life because he wrote quite a lot, and many of his writings have survived. And to this day, we can read what Caesar wrote. Julius Caesar is considered to be among the greatest military leaders of all time. In the course of his victories, many victories, Caesar became the first Roman general to cross the Rhine River into what in present day we would call Germany. No other Roman general had been able or had enough courage to cross the Rhine River. The bridge that Caesar instructed his legionnaires, that's what he would call his soldiers, to build over the Rhine River is still considered one of the great feats of military engineering. So we're talking about 55 BC, and Caesar decided he had reason to cross from Gaul into what we would today call France, into Germania to take on marauding Germanic tribes. He ordered his soldiers to build a bridge over the Rhine River, which was completed in 10 days, which is amazing in and of itself. The army spent 18 days in Germania, wandering around. They didn't fight anybody because when the Germanic tribes saw them marching over this new bridge they had just built, they fled in terror. So they just wandered around exploring for 18 days, crossed back over their own bridge, destroying it, and that was that. So one of the great feats in military engineering lived only 18 days. And again, because Caesar was a great writer and record keeper, his diaries left highly technical information as to how the bridge was built. This is one model that shows part of how the bridge was built. Caesar's victories pushed the boundaries of what was the Roman Republic and then later came to be called the Roman Empire all the way to the English Channel. Caesar was also the first Roman general to cross into Britain. So let's take a look at a map of present-day Europe and a little bit of northern Africa. So if we take a look, obviously we can see this boot. The boot is our kind of easily recognizable, that tells us where Italy is. So let's take a look at this. And the red marks the land controlled by the Roman Republic after Caesar's victory in the Gallic Wars. And that's a phenomenal expanse of land across Spain, France, Germany, all the way to the English Channel, Turkey, Greece, parts of northern Africa. It's astonishing, really. Now, Caesar was ordered by the Roman Senate to return to Rome. But he was feeling his power, and he ignored the order, and in 49 BC, he instructed his army to cross the Rubicon River. And that's the origin of a saying that we still have today called crossing the Rubicon, which means to pass a point of no return, crossing the Rubicon. Caesar's actions were considered treason, and they started a civil war. Caesar won this war, and in the process he amassed huge political capital. Caesar became dictator of the Roman Republic, but his rivals felt he had gained too much power. Now, when you gain lots and lots of power politically, you're also going to make a lot of rivals, a lot of enemies, and so this sets up the story of the downfall of Julius Caesar. And it also sets up the play written by William Shakespeare. So now let's talk about the play, Julius Caesar, the play. So what we just talked about is the historical backdrop against which Shakespeare wrote his play. Now the topic of this play would have resonated with the English. At the time, this play was written and would have been performed first in 1599. The Queen of England, who was Queen Elizabeth I, who had had no children, she was aging. In fact, she would die just 4 years later. So there was no plan of succession. She had not set up who was going to succeed her as the king or queen. Of course, if she had had a child, the child would have succeeded her automatically, but she did not have any children. So no succession plan had been put in place, so the English would have been very uneasy about the queen's successor. So a play about Julius Caesar, where they had all these questions about who was going to succeed Caesar after he was toppled, this would have been something that English audiences would have been able to relate to quite a bit. So this play features these themes: personal versus public responsibility, pragmatism, in other words, being realistic, versus idealism, omens or fate versus free will, honor versus power, problems with democracy. We say, of course, that democracy is the greatest form of civilization, the greatest form of government, but certainly it does have its problems. So these are the things that we are going to talk about as we read this play, and we'll have some discussions and we'll get into this play. So thank you, and we'll be talking to you again soon.